So delighted to continue this quarterly series and happy to collaborate with the Women of Dignity. And so I welcome my friend and colleague, Honor Maddock of Dignity, to say a few words on their behalf. Honor?
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to welcome everyone too to this important meeting this morning. I'm sure we're all looking for some insight. So I just, as Mary said, this is a wonderful collaboration and we love working with water. So let's get to our topic. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Honor. I want to continue with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are on the indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland that belongs to the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. This is their traditional and contemporary land. We acknowledge the trauma and the injustice toward indigenous people that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, as many of you know, is aimed to bring about social justice. So I ask you for a moment to consider the Native people on whose land you sit today. Feel free to add the names of those people to the chat if you wish, as a sign of respect for them and a commitment to working for their well-being. So if we could just take a moment of silence together, and you could put in the chat, if you're of a mind, put in the chat the name of the indigenous people whose land you sit on. And while you're doing that, also be sure to mute your audio so that we have a good, clear line for this recorded event. Thank you so much. Our theme this morning is Holding the Line, Expanding the Circle, Women and LGBTIQ Persons' Rights in a Time of Repression. I think there's no way to overstate the gravity of the situation we're experiencing, and there's no way to minimize the toll it's taking, especially on people far less privileged than most of us, as well as on us, of course, but in different ways. The need to support one another and build solidarity is right in front of us. It is not extraordinary work to which we're called, but the ordinary work of justice seeking that is our common task. Or as I've written elsewhere, this is what we trained for. Still, there's no mistaking the stress and pressure of the moment. The feelings we have as we watch our constitutional democracy fray, as we watch, especially in this area, our neighbors lose their jobs, and we look at those who are more marginalized than ever. In a recent session of this group, and it's why I like this group so much, we looked with the Reverend Linda Kaufman of the Episcopal Church at the Rainbow Railroad Project, a global NGO that helps at-risk LGBTIQ plus people get to safety worldwide. That's how the Rainbow Railroad Project describes itself, a global NGO that helps at-risk queer people get to safety worldwide. And one group, represented here, joined in that effort, and they have since welcomed a trans woman from abroad to their community. Thank you, Marie Hogarty and the Sophia community in New Jersey. I say that to say that, yeah, conversations like this just happen. Like Dorothy Day used to say about the Catholic worker, we were just sitting around the table and then such and such happened. And then we were just sitting around the table talking and then something else happened. And I think these conversations of women of dignity and water are like that they can spark action, and they often spark action. Marie Hogarty's group is a good example. Given the magnitude of the destruction wrought by the new administration, there are many approaches we could take in our analysis. But because of who we are, it seemed appropriate to look at the impact of executive orders and other government decrees on women and queer people. We need good data to inform our resistance. We need good data. So I thought, well, who would be able to provide that good data? And I invited Ellen Kahn of the Human Rights Campaign to join us. Ellen does this work all the time, understanding and trying to shape the political realities, and at the same time focusing very practically on the needs of families and especially of children. Ellen Kahn is a self-described trans-affirming lesbian feminist social worker. She has decades of experience. She's currently Vice President of Education and Systems of Care at the Human Rights Campaign, where she has worked effectively to deal with queer issues for a number of years. She's also, and perhaps most importantly, a longtime friend and neighbor, someone I see when she walks her dog or we're swimming at the YMCA. We've raised our children here in Silver Spring at the same time, in a wonderfully diverse and progressive neighborhood. I've come to respect Ellen and to trust her perspective. I think she'll be very helpful as a guide on the many and sinister recent government actions that threaten the well being of LGBTIQ people as we seek ways to resist them. We are recording this session, and it will be available on request from Water's website. We will, of course, remove any private or sensitive information before making the recording available. I said on request, but I think we're going to just put this one up. People do not, if you don't want your identity publicized as having been here, you may want to consider changing your name on the screen or turning off your camera. But otherwise, I think we're here together to have a conversation, and it is important to do so in a public way. Ellen, thank you for joining us and for your expertise. And I know you're from Philly and that you hope the Eagles will soar tonight. Go Birds. I love
Go
your
birds. I appreciate. Yes, I was showing this off earlier. This is a relic from I don't know, 30 or so years ago, but I'm proudly wearing it today.
For those who are not in the US, just to say this is Super Bowl Sunday, and it brings out a lot of very interesting
Yeah.
and profound insights. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yes, it's fair to say that I don't watch football during the season, but if my team, meaning a Philly team, makes the final or the playoff, I'm suddenly super fan. I'm a fair weather fan, and Philly, runs through my veins. So there's that. It is a true pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you, Mary and Diane, for inviting me. Mary, to earn your trust is a huge success for me. So thank you for that. To follow you is challenging because I don't have as much a grasp of the vast and beautiful English vocabulary, but I'll do my best to leave you with a sense of more information, more determination, more insight to how we can all be fighting and rebelling against the awful things happening to all communities. I did grow up in Philly, and I wanted to acknowledge that I sort of grew my roots in social work during the early days of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and I interfaced with a lot of folks in the dignity community in Philly, and know that historically you have always been on the front line and the right side of justice. And in the healthcare world, especially, I saw that during HIV, certainly during some of these fights to maintain access to reproductive health care. And it's good to be in the fight with all of you. So I wanted to share with you that, so yes, I work at the Human Rights Campaign. I've been there almost 20 years. And tomorrow, my workday will include supporting my team as we have to lay off 50 staff members. It's about 20 to 25% of our workforce. We do not get any federal funding at all. Part of this is in response to the crisis that's happening around us. And obviously there's a cascading and or domino effect when different sectors start to take a hit, and the nonprofit sector, which is us, is taking a hit. And part of it is kind of restructuring and recalibrating to meet the moment, to try to be as nimble as we can, to try to be in more of a rapid response and survival mode. And in the 20 years I've been there, while I've been there through a couple of terrible Republican administrations, this is, what we're seeing now is it doesn't compare in any way. We like the levers we would normally have, we can't even find to pull. So that's kind of where I am in my emotional state. And so I know I'm in supportive and loving hands right here with all of you. So you're all very smart people, so you probably don't need me to do like the 101 piece, but I think it's important to remind all of us that executive orders are a way for a new president, a new administration to make clear what they want the executive branch to do in terms of creating and establishing laws and rules. They don't, when they're signed, they don't immediately change the reality of what is legal. They can't, shouldn't, and can't legally, override what has happened through constitutions. I'll try to keep track of the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those, a little bit later. And most of them involve a process of rulemaking and setting up regulations. So basically, all the federal agencies, which are part of the executive branch, are asked to figure out how they can help to implement and execute these orders, this sort of vision of a particular president or administration. An example of that would be, so rules making might look like this, and some of you might be familiar with this. When the Obama administration, when they passed the Affordable Care Act, there's a part of that act, which is Section 1557, which addresses sex discrimination and language around inclusion. And their administration interpreted that to include gender identity and sexual orientation, so that LGBTQ people could not be denied access to the Affordable Care Act or mistreatment within provision of care. And then the first Trump administration put a set of rules in that changed the definition of sex to take out gender identity and sexual. This has been a battle for, over a decade now. A good administration says, yes, we do interpret this to include sexual orientation, gender identity. A bad administration redefines it. And so it's back and forth. Title IX is the same thing. Title IX, right now in schools, we had a good Title IX ruling that extended sex discrimination to include on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity. And now that's essentially going to go out the window. But technically speaking, nothing goes out the window when, Trump takes his Sharpie and, some flashy, piece of paper and signs it. But we are seeing waves of early compliance. We're seeing people respond out of fear, out of wanting to protect whatever they're reading into this as the potential punitive measure if they don't comply. There's tremendous misinterpretation of what the executive orders are actually saying. And, very few organizations I shouldn't say few, but far too few are holding steady and waiting to see what actually takes shape in terms of rules and regulations, as well as any steps Congress might take to clarify what is legal and what is not legal. So, complying in advance is compounding the harm, which I'll talk about. And it's to Mary's point, the data I have comes primarily through hearing stories, through first-person accounts, which is probably similar to what you're hearing. But that's, we know it's bad even just in the immediate sort of fear-based response and compliance than what we might see when and if at least some aspects of these orders are actually made clearly enforceable. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And I'll speak through, it might make sense to just talk through the executive orders that most impact the LGBTQ community and kind of what they mean and what we're seeing. And I can take questions as we go. Whoever's moderating, you can jump right in. I'm not monitoring the chat because I can't.
Yeah, Ellen, I would say if you lay out some more content, and then we'll move to Q&A, and I'll keep it in the
Gotcha.
chat. Okay.
Okay.
So you just
Yes,
go ahead.
I can be verbose too. So if you
No, it's very helpful and very clear, and it's a perspective that many people don't get when they just read the newspapers. So go for it. Thanks,
Okay,
Ellen.
super. Okay, so there are, I think, 6 or so executive orders that most directly impact the LGBTQ community. I neglected to say that I am just as horrified about and eager to fight around all of the other impacted communities, undocumented folks and women more broadly. And, it's a big fight. But again, I'm sort of staying in my lane of expertise today. So I think one of the first executive orders was to place restrictions on federal gender markers. So that would be passports, that would be social security cards, that would be birth certificates, vital records, things like that. So we know without a doubt that this administration and sort of the spirit of Project 2025, for lack of a better word, is going after trans people, pushing back on the idea of, there being they keep saying there's only two, genders, male and female, or two sexes, male and female. But we all know that for decades, gender nonconforming people, which includes people like me, a woman who loves and marries a woman, or, someone like Billy Porter, who is cisgender, but expresses himself with more of a feminine flair, which I frankly think is fabulous. Folks like us have, women going to work, right? Like women going to work was the end of the world for some of these people. So while trans folks are kind of in the crosshairs, I shouldn't say that, they're sort of most trying to alienate other trans people because they are such a small percentage, and only 30% of Americans say they personally know a trans person. So it's a real, they can kind of get away with it in a way. There's, we don't have a critical mass of folks who are just saying, stop doing this to my friend, stop doing this to my neighbor. But a lot of the executive orders really are rooted in this, grand evil plan to kind of make it impossible to be a trans person, to like transition and have your gender markers accurately reflected on your documents. So the, practical implications, some people did excitedly get an X marker. So maybe folks who are non-binary or who just sort of for any reason might eschew having to have a binary marker. But it was a great success for a lot of people who feel that is reflecting of how they identify. They will no longer issue those, and they will no longer make gender marker changes like an F to an M or an M to an F. So for, a lot of trans people, I heard from a family that I know through my advocacy work, their trans son is 22. His driver's license says male, his social security card says male. He hadn't had much occasion to travel outside of the US. They have a family trip next year. Can he get his passport updated? And the answer is no, he can't. And it wouldn't be safe to try, because we're hearing that, and I think it does vary a little bit office to office, because let's say one of us happened to work for the federal administration and our job was to process passports. Might we let one of those sneak by? I bet we might. But in the broad sort of population of people doing this work are, working in such a climate of fear because of the type of bullying and harassment and intimidation from the Trump administration, that I don't think you're going to have too many folks risking that. So this guy can't, really risk going with his family on this trip to Italy next year. It's like a big family wedding happening there. If he were to apply, they could certainly confiscate the documents. We don't know what they would do with them. We don't know what the intention of that is, but they would get an application. They'd get an original passport that's outdated and has an F, being asked to change, the new one have an M, and they would say, nope, this doesn't square. I'm told to hold this material. Terrifying, and we're not going to suggest anybody try that. So this guy, he either has to, decide he's going to travel with his family and change the way he looks and wears clothes. I haven't met him, so I don't know if he has a full beard or like what his look is and whether, but it's a terrible position to put people in. So that's kind of what we have going on with gender markers. And it is a clear and very cruel message that, you know, you can't actually navigate fully and safely, right? Like, think about applying for a job. If your gender markers don't match how you're presenting, like, you know, when any employer is going to say, well, what the heck is this about? You know, applying for a loan, like, it just sets you up to have all kinds of roadblocks along the way. So that's the gender marker piece. Let me just see. I was gonna keep going, but you'll flag. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear, Mary Ann, you kind of got in right under the radar there. So then there's the reinstating the military ban. There are about 15,000 openly trans people serving in our military in all kinds of roles, from very, very highly specialized 20, 30 plus years on the job to, you know, younger folks who saw this as maybe their only path to higher education or, you know, technical skills. As you know, it is the largest federally funded job training program, and for anyone to be locked out of that is really just awful and certainly unjust. So HRC is one of a few organizations collectively suing the Trump administration. We filed in the courts Thursday of this past week, just a few days ago. We have 6 plaintiffs and expect more to come forward. Imagine everything has a chilling effect. Everything I'm talking about today and everything you're hearing and seeing, right, has been like an immediate chilling effect, whether you're a teacher, serving in the armed forces, running a small nonprofit. And this is, you know, feels a lot like a witch hunt. And what we have found to be most, as I said earlier, a lot of people, you know, don't personally know a trans person. And so that really makes it hard to help them with a narrative based on truth and reality versus all the misinformation out there. But we've been finding these stories that are told by active trans folks in our military sharing their stories. I think someone was on CNN last week. We've had a couple of folks on NPR and other media just telling their story about why they wanted to serve their country and what their training has included, and the number of different what are they called? You know, when you fly and do these things, you know, all the kinds of things they do and the incredible technology they know how to use and how courageous they are. And it's for us, we're sort of leaning as much into storytelling, which I think is a great tool for all of you to think about in your own work and in your communities, how this is, you know, personally impacting people. So the military ban is just awful and, you know, not cost effective. It's sort of, it flies in the face of all these assertions about saving tax dollar money and, you know, all of that. Like, we've invested hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in these folks and their training, and you can't easily replace them. And so that's just you know, false narrative altogether, that this is about you know, being more savvy in our spending. The global gag rule came along as well. I think you know about that, and that affects a lot of work, you know, reproductive health care worldwide. I mean, it's something that's been helped to save lives in many countries. The global gag rule, the way it's been interpreted, has included LGBTQ people in terms of like some of the priority populations around HIV education, for example. And that is we're already seeing drying up of funds, throwing out funding applications that were in the queue, things like that. And just anything related to LGBTQ populations it's a hard no right now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the executive order I've been, I guess, most involved in my day-to-day work is the executive order directing agencies to prevent gender affirming care. And there are a few ways that's kind of, you know, the vision for that by this administration is that any federal health insurance policies, Medicaid, Medicare, anything, and the Affordable Care Act, any entity that receives funding through any of those sources would be prevented and potentially criminally, prosecuted in the worst case scenario if they provide gender affirming care. It also affects those institutions that receive federal research dollars. And as you can imagine, nearly every hospital is an academic institution, as well as a direct provider of healthcare. So the vast majority of hospitals, including children's hospitals, rely on these sources of federal funding for to keep their doors open and to provide care to kids with all needs, and to keep cutting edge research going. So it has put even the most, so we work with children's hospitals and their gender specialty clinics. There are a few years ago, before the state level ban started to come up, and about 20 or so passed, there were about 52 established gender specialty care clinics in children's hospitals across the country, right? These are like, well-established, highly esteemed children's hospitals. And then you started to see our opposition really focus on gender affirming care, mischaracterize it, rile people up, say it's, it's child abuse, all the things that you've heard. And we started to see a few years ago, individual hospitals like Boston Children's getting bomb threats. Why are they getting bomb threats? Well, because on this far right-wing media, whether it's in web chats or talk shows on radio, they're saying, they're mutilating children at Boston Children's Hospital. We have to do something about it, and telling all the lies. And then they would literally have, bomb threats, or, a doctor who's working at a hospital in San Francisco, who's been doing this work for 30 years and is one of the most renowned experts, has to be escorted to her car every night when she finishes work, because her name is out there as an expert. She's published research, she speaks at conferences, and now they're going after her and threatening her and her family. So that's been happening for a couple years. And now, so hospitals had to be very cautious, even before Trump won, to not sort of draw attention to the fact that they are in fact providing this evidence-based care. They don't want attention. They don't want their pediatricians or other providers to speak to New York Times. They don't want them to be putting themselves or the institution at risk. They want to just be head down and provide the care, because at the end of the day, that is what matters most. And totally respect that, and we've supported that. But that sort of void, and having them in the public square at all as the experts, left room for all of that misinformation and disinformation. You've seen New York Times articles on gender affirming care. You rarely hear the voice of one of these, deeply knowledgeable pediatricians or adolescent psychiatrists able to talk about their practice and what it's been like, because they've just been silenced, and sometimes it's to save their lives. So that was already the trend. And now with this executive order, the hospitals really feel like they have to make a tough choice. They're saying publicly that they are generally the public. I'm saying this because for you to know what's happening in your community, and to help people decipher, what is truth versus what might be strategy. The truth is that these hospitals, with the exception of surgery for minors, which is a very small percentage of their care, and is typically, might be a trans young man who has been in their care and has stable gender for years, and they know this child is doing very well, and they want to provide the chest surgery maybe before this kid has to go off to college. And wouldn't that just make sense, right? But because they're 18 and not 19, they're going to pause. But all of the other sort of routine care, maintaining them on hormones, mental health support, resources that they need, they're continuing that. They're just not saying that out loud, right? They're communicating that patient by patient. So we've chosen, HRC has chosen not to sort of shame and blame the hospitals and say, Children's Hospital Los Angeles put out a statement last week that they're no longer providing surgical interventions, and they're evaluating the impact of the executive order. They don't say, and we're continuing other care, because that would, they would draw such negative attention. So there was a big protest. People, maybe well-meaning people like us, said, I'm going to go protest, but it doesn't really I'd rather us protest the folks who wrote the executive order and say, why are you putting these hospitals and other institutions in an untenable situation? Why are you bullying them and threatening them? And, that to me would be better. But if you're hearing from folks in your community, please let them know that what they see on a Facebook post or what they heard whispered down the lane may not be exactly what is happening. We are finding ways, and the other organizations finding ways to help families and their kids maintain care, find access to care if they do in fact have some challenges where they are. We've been doing it since the first state level bans went into place. But at the end of the day, we do think that the Trump administration will have success conditioning Medicaid and Medicare and other federal funding. And that is going to, I think 50% of children in this country are Medicaid reliant, if I'm not mistaken. And what I've said to folks who are, sort of, well, it's, this trans thing, or it's only 1% of kids anyway. I say, well, I think it's 0.3% of kids have juvenile diabetes. So would it be okay if we just said, well, we're just not going to treat, kids with juvenile diabetes because it's such a small percentage? And, trying to somehow appeal to people's compassion and heartstrings if they exist at all. But I think that's going to be the toughest one. What we are seeing, and this is something to think about in your networks too. So if you say, what does that really mean? What would this executive order really mean? Well, it means that the majority of gender affirming care is being provided in these larger institutions where they have the infrastructure and sort of bench of experts to provide it sort of holistically and across the lifespan of these kids until they go into adult medicine. And there aren't as many folks in like smaller private practices, the pediatrician I take my kid to, right, for her immunizations, or if she has strep throat. It's a 3-person practice. They don't, this is not their thing. But if my kid's trans, I'm going to ask my current providers to print out their treatment plan. What does this treatment plan look like from now? My kid's 10. What would the treatment plan look like? You would be monitoring their puberty as they're progressing. And at a certain point, we would look at a puberty blocker. And then at a certain point, we would look at hormones and write it down. And what are the recommended products and doses? And have that written out and printed out, because if you can no longer see that provider in the hospital or clinic that gets federal funds, you can take that treatment plan to someone who is a licensed, medical provider, a pediatrician, but maybe hasn't had many trans patients or any, because in the past she's been able to refer them to the experts, and she at least knows sort of what the outline looks like and their online resources where she can look at standards of care and, get any answers she might need. So we're, compelling people to do that. We're saying, if you are in private practice and this hasn't been an area of expertise, would you be willing to sort of quietly see some of these patients without suddenly having to say, I'm a gender affirming care specialist, right? To sort of like keep it kind of under the radar, but meet a need in the community, especially during a transition until we figure out what the actual impact of this executive order might be. So that's a big one. I will say this, storytelling. I'm connected to tons of parents of trans kids all over the country, red, blue, progressive, not, all of the things. And they are terrified and angry and scared and worried. And I have, there's one mom I know who's in Mexico City this weekend. She's privileged enough to be able to buy a plane ticket and go. And she's bringing back hormones for her kid and a few other kids, because you can go into a pharmacy there and get these hormones. And it's that simple. And I fully expect, there's a doc I know in San Diego who's going to open a practice right over the border in Tijuana. She's bilingual, bicultural, and, she's going to see those patients outside of her other hours and have a nice clean line there. So again, folks, we talked about this sort of railroad, right, concept, underground railroad. This is another one that's forming to address healthcare for trans people. I'll talk about, I think the other big one, that's really shaken young people in particular is the executive order that's kind of dictating to students and parents and teachers what they can read, learn, and say to their kids regarding, what I like to say, the history of racism in our country, what they call, what do they call it? Uh, Whatever they call it, something else, and then LGBTQ related things. So I'm disgusted by the limitations on talking about race and racism, but again, I'm talking here today more about, critical race theory. There you go. Because any kind of like critical thinking is a threat to these folks, as you know. So so with that one, it has the same effect that the bill that was passed in Florida a few years ago was the first of its kind. People called it the Don't Say Gay bill. Of course, it's more expansive because it's Don't Say LGBTQ plus. It's not to talk about gender, not to read books about LGBTQ themes or by LGBTQ people. Same thing around critical race theory. It's all of that. What we know from here's another really challenging thing. You mentioned data, Mary. So starting with the Clinton administration and all the way through the Biden administration, we have been successful as a movement in getting data about LGBTQ people embedded into some key federal surveys. One great example that's very relatable to the work I do with youth is the CDC's Youth Risk Behavioral Survey, which is a biannual survey of high school students in the country. And hundreds of thousands of students fill this out every year. And it looks at everything from substance use, mental health, bullying and harassment, sexual health issues, intimate partner violence. It looks at a whole range of things. And 6 years ago, they were able to add sexual orientation into the survey so young people could choose to tell us if they were lesbian, gay, bisexual, or something other than heterosexual. And then 2 years after that, they piloted the gender identity. So young people could choose to say they're trans or non-binary or something other than cisgender. And then in this last full iteration of the YRBS survey in 2022, the national survey had the sexual orientation, gender identity. So we had for the first time ever this huge data set where we could compare kids who were not cis with kids who are cis, or not heterosexual with kids who are LGBTQ, and then any kind of strata of that, or Black communities, Latinx communities, etc. And this kind of data is the reason you were seeing so many federal grants to nonprofits and HIV service providers that actually spoke specifically to meeting the needs of the LGBT community, because our data, when we finally started to collect it through federal surveys, and we did with adults as well, and on the household growth survey, that's a big federal survey. There's a national federal health survey. So we started to be able to see trends. And it's with that data, like the CDC HIV data, we're able to say, oh, HIV rates still are highest among Black, gay and bi men, and Black trans women, and mostly in the South. Hello, that means that federal grants should be shaped to do some innovative work in those communities, right? Like something is not working, we need to figure it out. So it's really, the fact that we were able to finally have some data to look at, that so many federal grants basically were conditional. Like if you're going to get HIV money, then you need to show how you're going to meet the needs of some of these more marginalized communities. And that's kind of what we were seeing. CDC grants, SAMHSA grants, other big grants. You have to include in your vision of how to succeed in this research or in these services that you're going to make sure you're addressing the needs of these marginalized communities. So now the data is completely erased from every website I mentioned. They started even before the inauguration through some intimidation, but certainly by January 21st, they were taking everything off the websites. Our teams and other folks in the movement we're smart enough to pull everything down. We have access to all this data. Emory University, for example, is housing all the CDC data. This made me really feel sick the other day. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children took down everything related to LGBTQ youth and what the specific risks are, and even acknowledging they exist. I do still sleep a little bit at night, but honestly, that one was really, I just don't, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it's sociopathic. I can't even, go there, but that's kind of what's happening.
Ellen,
So,
let me
yeah,
ask
go ahead.
you
Yeah,
this.
let's stop. Yeah, I knew you'd have to stop me. Okay, here we go.
Well, I don't want to stop you because I don't think people want you to stop talking, and I just want to give you a little break and say thank
Okay,
you.
great.
And yeah, get a little water. But I just want to thank you for doing what I asked you to do, um, to Power of 10, and really providing us with very, very clear information, accessible information, trends, numbers, and unfortunately, the picture is grim. But
It
you
is.
know,
Yeah.
we are in this group, as with many groups that you talk with, we are fully on board to do what you're doing. So I just want to, if I may, just thank you on behalf of everybody. I want to summarize very quickly the several things that I picked up in the chat, and then we'll open it just for a few minutes. I'm going to still end us by 12:30, and people can stay on and talk as long as they want, because they will want to. One of the questions in the chat was which of these many orders are legal, and I think you laid out a very important distinction between what's legal and what gets done. The direction they point for the executive branch. We do have two other branches in this country. But I think the question of legality remains for the courts to decide.
Yes.
However, the trajectory is set. The other thing that I think you talked about which is not in the chat, but which I would add, is the waves of early compliance. This, I think, is the most chilling thing that you said, because the waves of early compliance go and dovetail with the notion that how dictators work is they set up fear and people begin to self-censor and do the work for them before they even need to, like what the NCAA just did in terms of sports. I mean, the NCAA
Yep.
complying immediately out of the gate
Yep.
is really a terrible thing. So that all athletic programs in the NCAA on every level of sports or all the sports that they work with seem now to have this. Seem now to have this as their way forward. So this is an example of this kind of early compliance. Marianne Duddy Burke put something very important in the chat, and I'm sure she and you would have a lot to talk about in terms of trans kids. And she talked about how her son got a passport under the wire, thanks be to God, and was able to have his passport changed. But that's not going to happen much. Professor Rosemary Carbine, who's a professor out in California, talked about many of her students being trans and other gender non-binary, whatever, and the importance of storytelling, and that's certainly in the classroom too, both as a survival technique as well as for a teaching technique. And then we had several people who had some conversation about, especially in the Boston area, where several people on this call are from, the funding questions around Children's Hospital and other places where you do have some of these funding cuts making a very, very big difference. So there's lots on the table here. I want to open it with a deep thanks to you, Alan. Now that you've got your breath, I mean, if the Eagles do half as well as you did, I think the Super Bowl outcome is you go to bed early because you're soaring. So I'm going to open it up just for a conversation, just for a few minutes for Q&A, and then I'm going to turn it to Diane for prayer and the announcements, and then we'll continue the conversation, those who wish, at the end of the hour. But I like to really respect the time of people who set this hour aside. So Q&A is open. You can use the reaction button at the bottom to raise your hand. Please feel free to do that. And as we say in my business, be brief, be witty, and be seated. So keep your questions short, and we'll see what people would like to hear about. But again, join me for a moment of applause for Ellen Kahn, who has given us enormous information and richness.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Yes, let's go. Who's first with a question, comment? Even pick up something that's in the chat if you want.
Well, I had to sit with, I mean, it's a lot to sit with, so I totally
Yes, it's a
get that.
lot. It's a lot. It really needs 2 sessions. But anyone who has just even an informational question, yeah, let's go over here. Jane and Peggy?
Yeah, for some reason I can't get the raise hand feature to work, but
Okay, don't worry.
I cannot be
Front
the only
paw
person.
works.
I cannot be the only person who showed up here looking for something that would give us hope. So I appreciate the download, and I would love something directional that says, so folks, here are the 3 things you can do, or here's the 1 thing you can do. But to give us something so that we're not ending on like, oh my God, it's also awful.
This is Mary Bridget from Duluth, Minnesota. I'm not sure if you can see or hear me, but I want to share one immediate positive thing you could do. A good friend of ours suggested we use an app called 5 Calls. 5, the number 5 calls. It's very intuitive, and you simply put in your zip code, and it will immediately give your congressional people and senators, and then whatever issue relative to Trump's edicts you can see, click on, for example, Elon Musk's work, for example, of getting into the Treasury Department. There's a script that you can follow if you choose to, but it's extremely convenient. And I have read, I'm not sure it's true, but that phone calls to our representatives as senators are more effective than letters right now. But thank you so much to everybody.
Okay, Ellen, the top of my list of questions was exactly this. What are some best practices or best strategies so that we can do things that are that don't just make us feel like we're doing something, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes there's fiddling while Rome burns, and there are also people who will be happy to set up all kinds of ways
Yeah.
you can function that are really distracting and diversionary and not, in fact. So what's your best,
Sure.
your best take on
Well,
this?
I
And then
I
Mary Ann
agree.
Duddy Burke
Yeah.
is going to talk about hope in her
Okay.
announcements. So go ahead.
Well, very quickly. So I agree with making your calls, and I would say, you know, don't stay on script. I go off script, and I just, you know, I make it clear that I'm outraged and terrified, and you know, so just be authentic when you're talking with your reps. I would one thing else. One of the to-dos is not sort of a big call to action for saving democracy. It's really responding to a data point, which is LGBTQ youth, even if they have tremendously supportive families and live in a blue state, they are not immune to the hostility and hatred in the air around them. And they are terrified, and trans youth especially are terrified. So in your own communities, if you can create safe space, if we know schools are potentially going to be taking a step back, or the nonprofit that was serving some of these youth has to, you know, maybe they're losing money or they have to be more careful. Create some spaces anywhere you can, a library, a church basement, you know, and bring families together and give people safe places to come and be in community together, and you know, correct people when they say things that are simply not true about being trans. And you don't have to be an expert. You can just say, you know, that doesn't sound right with me, and this is what I know to be true. And why even like, why is this, how is this important to you, you know? And just try to be an excellent ally every chance you get.
Thanks, Ellen. That's helpful. And one other thing I would add to that is that not all of us on this call, but many of us on this call who are LGBTQ people have lived through these things ourselves. And we have had this kind of experience of being marginalized and hated and maligned and misunderstood and lied to and lied about. And so I think moving off of that experience, we can really be very helpful. Anne, you have your hand up and you have a comment. Anne, unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Yes, a couple things. I had put it in the chat that Trump and his group, in their wisdom, has just declared that everyone is female because they signed that executive order defining sex at conception. Well, at conception, the biological default sex is female. And the factors that trigger the Y chromosome, if they do it at all, don't take place until later. So that's argument number one that you might be able to really irritate some MAGAs over. Other ways to irritate and get people to think is to quote the LGBTQ positive messages in the gospel, because there's Matthew, it's either what, chapter 19 or 12, I'm blanking at the moment, all about those who make themselves eunuchs for the glory of God. And then also Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch is also very LGBTQ plus positive, because it says that he's coming back from offering sacrifice in the temple. It's like, no. The eunuch would not have made it past the immersion baths, so he would not have been allowed to do anything in the temple. He would have been tossed out with the women. So the thing is he finds out about Jesus, and the first thing he says is, all I have to do is be baptized. There's water. Let me in, let me in, let me in.
Thanks, Anne. Let's hear from others who might have something this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Maybe hear one or two more people. Yeah. Who's next? Marcy Silvestro from New Mexico.
A couple of things we've done in New Mexico since all this stuff has come out is we've had 2 large statewide meetings. We have a monthly group called the LGBTQ plus roundtable. That's been going on for like 6 years. But we had a huge meeting in the convention center, a statewide, and we talked about what does it mean to be community and how can we help each other. And we had all people from the immigration world, the Black community, a very mixture about my big byline in life has always been everyone is a thread in the web of safety. And so we talked about that. How can we keep each other safe? How can we support each other? And the big issue I brought up there was misogyny. A lot of reality under the trans community, because more men become women, is misogyny. And we have to keep that reality in sight as well. But I think the thing right now, I think, Mary, you said in the beginning, is community. How do we protect each other? And we have been trying to open up a center for youth here, especially. And because of all of this, someone stepped forward with a $500,000 donation and 3 years of free rent for that to happen. And I think the one thing I've been talking to a lot of young people about is not giving their power away. And the fear-based reality, how, that's not the way to go. As we all know, in suicide in this nation, the most completed suicide is by LGBTQ youth. And so that message, all nonprofits are getting that out as well. They're even nonprofits who don't serve our community are opening their doors as a safety place for anybody who needs comfort. So I think that is a good strategy we're doing here in New Mexico. I'm also on the Santa Fe Community Foundation's Envision Fund, which started in 1997 for the LGBTQ community. And we have always given to nonprofits that work with our community. And we're looking at how do we now open that door to be even more. So I think it's what community strategy, and our governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, has sent letters out that she is with us, and even the governor's mansion, if somebody wants safety, she opened her doors to be a place of safety for our community. So those are some strategies we're doing here in New Mexico.
Great, Marcy. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn with those glimmers of hope, and I admit there are glimmers of hope, and there will be more in our further conversation. I'm going to turn to Diane New for just a moment of reflection together, and then we'll turn to Mary Ann and continue with announcements and conversation. There's a lot more to unpack here, but lest I be remiss, Ellen, you have kicked this off in a very important way, and I hope you will count on us to be allies with you and with the work that you're doing, and call upon us. And I'm glad you know that Dignity people, especially the Boston crowd, and just really this all reinforces how much we're working together. So thank you again. And insofar as you can stay around, please do so. I'm sure people have many more questions for you. Diane?
We are powerful, activist, political, spiritual people here. And so let's lean into the spiritual side for a moment as we hold the line and expand the circle. Let's pray, holding this line and expand the circle far and wide for women's and LGBTQIA plus persons' rights in a time of repression. To LGBTQIA plus and non-binary friends who share joys and sorrows, the circle of friendship to you. To people living in war-torn countries, the circle of peace to you. To people with cancer and those who are sick, the circle of healing to you. To families divided by differences, the circle of reconciliation to you. To children of every race, family, and country, the circle of love and protection to you.
To people in despair, the circle of hope to you. To those who are without homes, the circle of shelter to you. To those who are hungry, the circle of food to you. To those who have no job, the circle of remunerative work to you. To those who are dying, the circle of a peaceful death through you.
To children being born this day, the circle of life, health, and safety to you. To those who experience discrimination in any form, the circle of justice to you. To LGBTQIA plus people who experience violence from war, rape, and religion, the circle of safety and restitution to you. To the elected leaders of every country, the circle of vision, truth, and mercy for the global community to you. To young children growing up today, the circle of equality to you.
Thanks, Wed, and thanks, Magdalena. Who else needs our prayers? Let's pause. And when we come back to the whole circle, we'll open it up for any further sharing. There is a world out there that needs our prayers. And we are powerful spiritual people. And so we close with a song, We Shall Be Known. How shall we be known in this day?
We shall be known by the count we keep, by the ones who circle round and fire. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round and inspire. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves well. It is time now, and what a time to fly. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
Amen. Blessed be. May it be so. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Diane and Wed and Magdalena. And again, thanks to Alan Kahn. I'd like to turn it over to Marianne Duddy Burke, who has a word of hope and has her announcements from Dignity. And I think it's all of a piece. Marianne?
It sure is. And thank you to Ellen and to everybody here who has brought your questions, your anxieties, your hope, your determination, all of that. I think the most important announcement that I want to make is we so many groups are underscoring the importance of staying in support of community at this time. And Dignity USA and the Women of Dignity are no different. Women of Dignity meet on a Zoom call every other Monday. Tomorrow night will be a session. Topics range from very heavy to spiritual to light and funny. They're marvelous calls. If you are not part of that group and you would like to join this community, the email is in the chat. Just email dignitywomen@gmail.org. The communities of Dignity USA are also very much open to folks joining either in person or online liturgies or activity. Again, there are lists of our communities and how to access them on our website, which is also in the chat. I also want to note that as a hopeful action, Dignity USA has in the last 10 days submitted amicus briefs in 6 of the lawsuits that are going on to challenge Trump administration events or other things. For example, the Mahmoud versus Taylor that Ellen spoke to about parents trying to and government officials trying to limit people's access to information. We've joined with the ACLU, with GLAAD, with all kinds of groups to submit amicus brief from the perspective of LGBTQ plus Catholics and our families as a voice, particularly to counter the U.S. Catholic bishops and various states' bishops' conferences, which are also often in the forefront on the other side of these lawsuits. So please do that. Know that we are there speaking for your voice. It is really disturbing to hear about the degree of layoffs that are about to happen at HRC, again, further weakening institutions on the forefront of us. But this, as Ellen said, this is not alone. Across the United States, charitable giving is down between 14 and 18% over the last 2 years. Many, many organizations that we all care about are really struggling and need our support. So one thing, I think we all ask is for you to consider what organizations are out there doing the work that you need. And if you can give volunteer time, if you can give money, if you can help amplify their missions and messages, all of that is critically important at a time when the stresses are increasing and the resources are diminishing. That's really important. I would also like to direct you to the fact that in Dateline, which is Dignity USA's generally bi-weekly e-newsletter, we have started a new feature in which we will be offering regularly hopeful actions that folks can take. It started with the issue that came out on Friday, and we encourage you to either submit or take advantage of some of the suggestions that feel right. And finally, I just want to let you know that within a week, we will be officially opening registration for our 26th National Conference, which will be held July 4th through 6th in Columbus, just outside of Columbus, Ohio, with the theme, We Are God's People, Here, Now, Always. It will be another marvelous way to be in community, so look for that registration and please consider joining us. Thank you, and back to water. Again, we always love this partnership. Today feels particularly important to be in solidarity with one another and to be building this community of hope.
Thanks so much, Mary Ann. I knew that you'd have exactly what we need, and the many activities of dignity give hope to all of us. I would also like to mention just a couple of things from water. On Tuesday of this week, we will have our monthly water liturgy with Diane New and the water community, sharing love in difficult times. So you can begin to see the theme unfolding as water steps up to do the work to which we're called, not only the work today, but sharing love in difficult times, acknowledging and celebrating each other as our work during uncertain and difficult times unfolds. So kindling a light of love so that it may shine more brightly than our worries and our angst. And I think that's just a wonderful theme for prayer and reflection. And then on Wednesday next, not this coming, but next Wednesday, the 19th of February, we will have a special collaboration with the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network that many of you know. And with that network, we will be sponsoring a conversation actually between Charlotte Bunch and myself. Charlotte Bunch, one of the great feminist lesbian leaders of our time, an activist with religious roots, will be in conversation with me during that hour on February 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And it will be really a one and only opportunity to talk with Charlotte Bunch about lesbian feminism and its intersection with religion. Charlotte Bunch is a global feminist activist and theorist, one of the great women of our time now, having turned 80, exploring new things in her life. And she will have many, many insights, not only in the long history of religion and queer activities, but also, I'm sure, on today's global threatening crisis. I'm delighted about that. I think I want to repeat, though, that the liturgy this week at 7:30 on Tuesday, the 18th, will be at 7:30 in the evening Eastern Time, and then Charlotte Bunch at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the following day, on February 19th. So those are two water programs that I think are really exciting. And as Mary Ann says, it's now a time to really work with other organizations. And so when we had the opportunity to co-sponsor with LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, what better? So, just to conclude with saying the next meeting of this group, to which you are all invited, will be Sunday, May the 11th, 2025. Water leading again, then Dignity will lead the second two meetings during the year. It will probably be a Mother's Day ritual, but that's not sure yet. So, same time, same station, 11:30 on Sunday morning, the 11th of May, 2025. Feel free to join and bring your women friends. So I want to thank everybody. I want to also say with great emphasis that the Zoom is still open for conversation. Ellen provided us, Ellen has had to leave our call at this hour. She has a daughter moving here in town, so she has some other responsibilities. But I know I speak for all of you in thanking Ellen really in a hearty way for the information and the passion and the leadership that she provided for us today. So with that, the floor is open and you're all welcome to stay and have conversation. I want to thank one more time Diane and Wed and Magdalena for collaborating on this from the water end. And to our Dignity friends and colleagues, yes, it's a wonderful collaboration and I hope it will continue. It's when we have these things in place that we're prepared then to step up in moments like this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have certain mechanisms that we use, and this is one of them, and I'm really delighted and grateful.